we have to really start with how fundamentally powerful culture is, all forms of culture, including visual art, music, language.
We can rebuild buildings, we can rebuild bridges, we can rebuild schools, but if we do not incorporate our story, our art and our culture, our history.
A cultural framework. The theme for our community is community, culture, and commerce. And that's not just what Ashe says, that's what everybody says.
Part of the creative placemaking work is not about arts and culture on its own, but arts and culture as it is integrated in how we think of healthy communities.
What's important to you, what's important to me, how might we use arts and culture to advance our joint missions?
I'd like to welcome everyone to Semaine de la Francophonie this year for 2018. Jean-Robert, why don't you come up here too? And our first opening was in Arnaudville yesterday, and it was a day full of dialogue, and it was incredible. We're happy to be here in New Iberia. To spread the wealth of French and to also help identify French assets within the community. And I want to introduce Monique Tessier here from Quebec. And just could you provide a formal greeting in French?
C'est quoi le formal greeting? Bien, bonjour. Bienvenue à New Iberia pour cette deuxième journée de la Semaine de la Francophonie dans les parish ici, autour de Madame Arnaudville, aujourd'hui New Iberia, demain à Béziers, après Washington, et on va terminer cette belle semaine avec Lafayette, jeudi.
Jean-Robert, est-ce que tu veux dire quelque chose pour le film?
Yes, Jean-Frigo from Colorville. Just to say that there's a network being set up between the city of Quebec, Quebec City, Moncton, and Lafayette, which they're trying to promote this kind of symbiotic connection, naturally through tourism, ecotourism, and stuff like that, but they want to expand that. And I think it's going the same direction. There already are some, and I think New Iberia is part of it. You're on the map. The City of Quebec set up a web page to promote its members. So out of this, New Iberia, Bridge, where I live, so Arnaudville, there's a lot of towns and cities in Louisiana, Alexandria, that belongs to this network. Now this network, you don't have to be French to belong to it. You just need to want to showcase the heritage and at the same time maybe do that special effort. So we're going through that direction. There's already something happening.
And Semaine de la Francophonie feeds right into that. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to take this event on the road, was to work directly with communities to help them or to provide a reason for them to identify their French assets within the community. Right now, I'd like to introduce Ms. Fran.
Thank you. Bonjour, and welcome to New Iberia. Thank you for taking me on the road, George, to New Iberia. I'm very appreciative of New Iberia being selected to be part of the summit, and I want to thank all of the for giving of your time and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. I'd like to acknowledge some of the people that helped in New Iberia to pull this together. First of all, this beautiful venue, the Sliman Theater, is the venue of the city of New Iberia. So we're very fortunate to be able to use this. We have our Greater Iberia Chamber of Commerce, Janet Falk and her team, that invited their leadership class to attend today in some of her offices here right now. Also, I'd like to thank the Tourist Commission for allowing us to be a sponsor for this event. And I have Brittany from our team here to help out today. And George, Jennifer, Loretta, Amy, everyone that was involved in organizing the event, we think it's a fabulous opportunity for us and we're very appreciative. Right now I'd like to introduce one of our finest assets, a good tourism partner for us. This lady is responsible for a lot of what you see downtown in New Iberia right now. She's very generous with her time. She's a tremendous help to my office in promoting New Iberia and Iberia Parish. We're very fortunate here in New Iberia. We have a good network locally, organizations that have a good track record of producing promotions and initiatives and getting through the weeds of things and working together to make something happen. And I'm very proud of that. And I want to introduce the lady that leads us for the city of New Iberia, Jane Bro.
Thank you very much. I don't think I need a microphone because my voice usually carries throughout the room. If you have to hear me, just let me know. Thank you, Fran, for your kind words. On behalf of Mayor Freddie DePort, who would have been here with a little more notice, but he's not able to attend today because his schedule was very full. I want to welcome you to historic New Iberia. Known as the Queen City of the Teche, New Iberia is among Louisiana's oldest towns, as you know. Founded in 1779 by the Spanish settlers under the direction of Don Francisco Bulani, and was originally known as Nuevo Iberia. We're inside the Sliman Performing Arts Studio, which Fran told you, you all know, formerly known as the Evangeline Theater. Originally, it started its life as a wholesale grocery in the late 19th century, remodeled for a movie house in 1929, and gained its current Art Deco facade and other characteristics during a 1939 renovation. The interior walls, as you see, left exposed to show evidence of the building as a wholesale grocery. A series of pockets in the brick walls denote where shelves and hangers were attached to hold groceries and other supplies. The high vaulted ceiling is a dominant feature of the lobby, and the lobby's light fixtures, as well as a majority of these, are original to the building. The vertical Art Deco Evangeline sign that still graces the front of the building is also original to the theater. Neon didn't become widespread in the state until the 1930s, so the sign represents an early use of neon throughout the state. Donated to the city by the Sliman family in 1997, the city renovated the theater to fully restore its 1940s appearance on the outside. The interior was renovated more for general use of the theater, which is where we are today, workshops, conferences, receptions, and so forth. The theater is listed on the National Register for Historic Place of Historic Properties. On July 28, 1983, the National Register Residential District, the East Main Street District, was designated and encompasses New Iberia's late 19th and early 20th century residential homes. There are 71 homes in the district, most of which date between circa 1890 to 1930. On December 12, 2017, this past December, the National Register Downtown Commercial Historic District received its designation with 123 buildings within. 82 are classified as contributing, and 7 were already listed individually on the National Register. The district retains its historic integrity as a commercial center for New Iberia and the surrounding region. And I'm so proud of this designation. We worked for over a year and it was a lot of work, let me tell you, to identify each building. And there's a team from the mayor, Paul Allen, and his staff and his children. Everybody volunteered, whether they wanted to or not, to photograph and document. So we have history and documentation on every building in the commercial district at this time. We also in the city have 2 cultural districts. Downtown Historic District, which pretty much includes the boundaries of our existing historic district, and the West End Historic District, which includes properties all along Hawkins Street and thereon. The New Iberia Main Street program was accepted into the national and state program in 1993. The national program was created by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Now it is a nonprofit organization, a standalone nonprofit organization known as Main Street America. The program is based on a 4-point approach, which is promotion, organization, economic vitality, and design. I am one of 4 nationally certified Main Street Program directors in the state, with the New Iberia Main Street Program receiving national accreditation for the past 3 years. In 2005, thanks to the immeasurable hard work and dedicated efforts of private investors, and I can't take all the credit, and I won't take all the credit, for the awards and acknowledgments that the Main Street Program and Main Street has received over the past several years. I've been with the city since 1993, and I'm also the planning and zoning director for the city and grants writer, as well as a Main Street Program director. But it's my pleasure to work with the Tourist Commission and Fran and Janet, with the Chamber and Marcia, and we're a team in New Iberia, and I don't think that you'll find that, I may be wrong, but I attend a lot of Main Street meetings throughout the state, and there are 41 Main Street communities, and they're amazed at the camaraderie and the team spirit that we possess in New Iberia. Things don't happen unless we're all involved, and that's a good thing. We share volunteers, we share projects, we sponsor and co-sponsor special events and projects, fairs, festivals, and just many other things. In 2005, as I said, thanks to the immeasurable hard work and dedicated efforts of our private investors, including Mayor DeCourt, who owns 14 buildings downtown, New Iberia was awarded the Great American Main Street Award. We were the first in the state to receive this relative to successful revitalization of a commercial district. The award was presented during the open plenary at the National Main Street Conference in Baltimore, Maryland. And we were the first community in Louisiana to receive this award, since Natchitoches received theirs, I think, a couple of years after, and just rightfully so. So, as I stated, the Main Street Program has a strong relationship with other organizations. And there's so many projects, the Gumbo Cook-Off, and there's so many fairs and festivals. Usually this time of the year, primarily in the fall, every weekend there's something to do in New Iberia. And I wanted to include Iberia Performing Arts League also. They're a real big asset to the community. One project that I'd like to highlight that you all will probably be interested in is Iberia Cultural Resources sponsors a trilingual marker project which now includes 21 trilingual walkers. And if you step outside the theater, you'll notice there's one on the museum and there's one on the theater, and all up and down the street in different locations. So as I understand, I think we are the only city in the country that has a project of this kind, and we're very proud about that. So we have several projects in the works, and several actually that we've applied for grants. Excuse me. Church Alley Trail, or Pocket Park, right across the street, if you'll notice, is the beginning of the trail, beginning of a 3.2-mile bicycle trail through both National Register districts. The park is nearly complete. We have just a couple of things to add to the park, and it'll be completed shortly. We have a canoe and kayak dock application, which I've just submitted, and that's across the bayou. 2 marinas, one behind City Hall, one alongside the boardwalk. A CBA system, those projects are through Wildlife and Fisheries. I've just turned in, last week, Thursday was the deadline, a Bloomberg grant for $600,000, which will be a temporary art project focused on peace through art in our community, and PEACE being the acronym for Police Engagement and Community Enrichment. And I'm now working on several grants for the police department. The City of New Iberia will be introducing a new city police department starting July the 1st. We're very happy about this big project and very excited about what that means for our city. New Iberia features an intriguing mixture of trade and commerce, combined with a vibrant cultural accent, which makes our city unique. And we could not be more thrilled with you being here today. And I thank you for coming, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of what the Main Street program and some of our other partners do in the city, and if anyone has any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jane. So you can see one of the reasons why it's really good for us to travel to different communities is to learn about the communities, to learn more about communities, and to also learn about the French. I'll just tell me your name.
Nelwyn.
Miss Nelwyn, Iberia. So that's a treasure right there. So I just want to say that. So right now I'd like to introduce Mr. Malcolm. What? Come on. And when I said that we had rock star speakers, I mean, we really do have rock star speakers. You know, Ann Barkison yesterday, you know, today Malcolm White. So Malcolm, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and then just proceed from there?
Happy to. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Malcolm White. I am the director of the Mississippi Arts Commission. In Louisiana, you have a bit of a different setup. You have a Department of Culture, and inside that department is your arts component. In Mississippi, we're set up totally different. We're a standalone commission, and we are not in any other department of government. So we enjoy that sort of unique status. I think here you answer to the Lieutenant Governor. In Mississippi, we answer only to our Board of Directors. So it gives us a little more flexibility. Last year, they tried to fold us into another department of economic development, and literally the people of Mississippi rose up and opposed that and shut down the governor and the legislature and refused to be merged into economic development. So we continue our autonomy, continue to be a standalone agency, exclusively concentrating on art and culture. So I guess I'll stand over here so I can manipulate the PowerPoint. First of all, again, I don't know what the gremlins are up to, but I can hear them back there. Might be better without it. I'm not a French speaker, so I was somewhat puzzled when I was invited to a conference on French immersion and the concept of French culture and its place. I live in, as I said, I live in Mississippi. About the closest thing we come to a French connection is that, the French settlers came ashore in 1699 on the coast of Mississippi. They fight about where. Ocean Springs says that D'Iberville came there, and Biloxi says D'Iberville came there. Doesn't matter to me. D'Iberville showed up. And so we have that connection to the French culture. But we don't have a secondary language in Mississippi. We all speak redneck. That's what I speak. I came into my position, oddly enough, as a result of Hurricane Katrina. I owned a private business. My family owns and operates a restaurant and a live music venue and a bar. And I have been doing that for some 30 years, producing events, doing special events, concerts, festivals, and owning and operating this place called Howlin' Mouse. It's a family restaurant, bar, venue, live music venue in downtown Jackson in the old GMO freight depot in the heart of the city of Jackson. But when I own a house in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's just across the river from Louisiana. We're the first community after Louisiana when you cross the Pearl River. So I grew up in that part of the world, and I had bought a home there in 2002. And so when Katrina came ashore, I think this is another thing that we have in common, is that we're not only next door neighbors, but we struggle together in natural disasters. We're also part of the Deep South, and we struggle with economics. How about we just do away with that? It's got to be irritating. So in 2005, when Katrina came ashore, I was a property owner on the coast, but more importantly, I was very concerned about what rebuilding would look like. And I literally went to the governor of Mississippi, who at the time was a guy named Haley Barbour. He was sort of a well-known commodity. He'd been in D.C., he'd run the National Republican Party, he'd been very influential. And he was our governor. And I went to him and I made this case that no recovery is complete without the recovery of your story, of your art and your culture and your history. And that I wanted to make a case for the rebuilding, that as we rebuilt, we would acknowledge culture, acknowledge story, acknowledge art, and to incorporate it into the recovery effort. And he was agreeable to that, but he had no idea what I was talking about. And my point was, we can rebuild buildings, we can rebuild bridges, we can rebuild schools, but if we do not incorporate our story, our art and our culture and our history into that, then we are, in many ways, being irresponsible. So we put art on the bridges when we rebuilt the bridges. We made sure that every cultural institution in the lower 6 counties of Mississippi were given the financial support to survive Katrina. So we did not lose a museum, we did not lose the symphony, we did not lose any of our theaters or any of our cultural organizations. In fact, they were stronger after the storm because they were given special attention. And so I was able to take this mantra of no recovery is a complete recovery without the recovery of your arts, culture, and story. I come out of the private sector where I've spent my entire life into state government for the sole purposes of being the arts and cultural recovery person. So I figured that would take about 3 years. I'm still in state government. I've been in state government now for almost 12 years. I served 7 years as the director of the Arts Commission. I was then appointed to become the state's tourism director, where I served 3 years as the state tourism director, and now I have come back. I may be the only guy in the United States that served 2 terms as an arts director and 1 term as a tourism director. So it gives me a rather unique point of view on how arts, culture, and tourism and economic development work together. In Mississippi, the tourism department is literally under what we call the Mississippi Development Authority, which is our economic development shop, which is part of the executive branch. So during that three-year period where I ran the tourism office, I worked in the executive branch, the governor's office, theoretically, under economic development. So not only did I get to work on tourism, what we think of as tourism, in that department is also the film department. And you in Louisiana know the power of having a progressive and strong film office, because you have really done well here. In fact, Mississippi can barely keep up with what's going on in Louisiana and Georgia. And quite frankly, our legislature in this last session decided not to fund the incentive program that allowed us to bring the large motion pictures to Mississippi. So we've fallen even further behind Louisiana and Georgia. And I know in Louisiana there's been a lot of conversation about whether or not this was a good investment, whether the state should invest in movie making and the film industry. And but I think it is good business. Having run it for 3 years, I think it is good business. But what killed us in Mississippi was the legislature asked for a report from our peer committee on the impact of filmmaking as economic development. And sadly, the result was they determined that for every dollar the state of Mississippi spent in the film industry, we only got 64 cents back. So the legislature said, no mas. You know, we have a program, but we lost the out-of-town incentive piece with a couple $1 million a year, which enabled us to have big pictures. So the last big picture we had was the James Brown biopic, Get On Up. And I doubt you will hear much more about big films coming out of Mississippi. You know, we did Mississippi Burning, we did The Help, we kind of were on a roll there. But our legislature decided this was not the best investment for Mississippi. So they cut back on the out-of-town piece, which is how you pay your stars. So without stars, you don't get big films. You know this. You live in Louisiana, and you are doing a good job at that. So I had been this private sector guy, free enterprise, restaurant, bar, promoter, producer. I come into state government with this one mission, that it was all about recovery from Katrina. And after I got there and we went through that process, I discovered that I liked this nonprofit arts world. And in fact, at my age then, it was probably a good place for me to park it for a while. And so, as you now know, I've been there ever since. So I want to, again, thank you for having me here. And I was in Arnaudville last night. I came around 11 yesterday. I spent the whole day there. So many of you have seen me around. I don't know, how many people in this room have already were there yesterday? Yeah, quite a number. So it's like everybody over here is from Arnaudville, everybody over here is from New Iberia. Is that right? Is that how y'all roll? So,
We didn't mean to.
yeah, it happens. So what caused me to stay was two things. One was I was absolutely attracted to the work. It was like, this is what I was doing in the private sector, and if I could do it in the public sector, I felt like I could really make a difference. And the truth is, in the end, that's really why we're here. Freelances, we did for-profit, nonprofit, and we did it during this recession to get a look at what that was. So another job that I have, another post that I get to have is I have a seat on the Mississippi Delta Heritage Area Board. And we have looked long and hard at the Shafalaya Heritage Area success. And so we have mimicked a lot of what y'all have done. So you're starting to see the trend here. Whatever y'all do, we do. And we may say bad things about you, but we truly do. And so I've been able to have a seat on that board from its inception through writing the management plan through the beginning of implementation, and now I sit on a search committee to hire our first program manager. So we're so excited in the Mississippi Delta Heritage Area to finally get a chance to put some of these big ideas into practice. So that's another sort of unique thing about the perspective that I have is I'm serving on. We have three, I don't know how many in Louisiana, we have 3 heritage areas in Mississippi. I don't know.
I think
you have 2.
We have 2, the Cane River National Heritage Area and then Chapelaya National Heritage Area.
Okay. So 2. We have 3. We have a Gulf Coast National Heritage Area. We have the hills up in the Tupelo, Corinth, Boonville area. And then we have the Delta, which encompasses, I think, 14 counties along the river. So we have 3, which is really great. Most of our state is in a heritage area. And I think that's another thing that we have in common with this part of the world. And that is that we have a rich, important cultural story to tell, yet we're in a relatively poor agrarian landscape. So it may seem odd to you, but when I drive around this part of the world, I feel very at home being from Mississippi, because Mississippi has one city, Jackson, the capital, and everything else is rural. The entirety of Mississippi is rural. So the vast majority of the work that I do is rural underserved. Jackson, we take care of Jackson, but we don't need any urban initiatives in Mississippi because there's only one. So that's primarily the work that we do. My counterpart here is, of course, Cheryl Castile, who was with us last night. If you don't know her, you should. She's a magnificent human being, and I think a great arts and cultural leader. And I've enjoyed getting to know her. She and I also serve on another board together called the South Arts Board, which is the 9 Southern State Regional Arts Commission. So the way America funds nonprofit art is through the National Endowment for the Arts. I love to tell this story. Many of you already know it, but I love it because it's so important. That in 1965, the Congress of the United States made a very conscious decision that we in America would fund public support of the arts, and passed a law setting up the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. This was a legacy of John F. Kennedy. This was Kennedy's idea, that there would be an endowment, that money would be set aside to publicly fund arts and culture and humanities. Unfortunately, President Kennedy was assassinated and never saw this come to fruition, but President Johnson signed the law that literally created the two endowments. And from that day to this day, our country respects the endowments for the arts and humanities by funding them on an annual basis. But part of the deal was that Kennedy and Johnson forged was that not all the money would stay in Washington, D.C. A percentage of the money that Congress appropriated would be shared with the states, and every state who chose to participate would get a chunk of the federal money. The formula is this: 60% of the money the endowment receives stays in Washington. 40% go to the 53 states what do they call it?
Territories.
The districts. And territories, that's what I was looking for. So Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., they all receive a chunk. So that 40% is divvied up to the states, and in order to get that money, the states have to match it with local money. So if my chunk, if my 1/53rd of 40% is $1 million, then I have to come up with $1 million in order to receive the federal money. You know that here because y'all struggled with that formula. Your legislature took away your art funding and you had to go to tourism to get the backup money. So in Louisiana, your arts work is currently funded by your tourism tax, which is fine with me. But in Mississippi, it's all of our money, our federal money is matched by our legislature specifically for the work of the arts. So that's and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., on the banks of the Potomac River, is a national monument to this work. Just as there is a Washington Monument and a Jefferson Memorial, the Kennedy Performing Arts Center is the monument to our dedication to publicly fund the arts in America. Now, we have a president that has for 2 years now recommended unfunding, zeroing out the public funding for the arts and the humanities. That's fine. Fortunately for us, the Congress does not see the world in that way, and for the 2 years that he has recommended unfunding, they have given us an increase. Just to say to him, Mr. President, this is not how we roll. We believe in public funding of the arts and the humanities. So let's see if we can make this work. We've had a lot of fun with this. So in Mississippi, we have tried to position the creative economy and arts and culture in a similar position to traditional economic development. And you know this as well as I do, that's not easy. Because our economy in Mississippi is farm. We are an agrarian economy. And anything you talk about, you talk about it as farm or non-farm. Like all statistics are this, and then non-farm economy. So we are a farm economy. I think here you're petroleum and farm and other things. But in Mississippi, we have to think always about where we begin the conversation. And this is what I believe. Many people think that Mississippi's greatest asset is farming, and it is our largest economy. But often people say our greatest asset is the river. Now, we share that river with you and many other states, but we got the name, so often people think the Mississippi River is like the greatest asset that we have. So that's often where we begin the conversation. But I say it is a great resource, and it is a great asset. But I believe our greatest asset is our story. I think the story of Mississippi, good, bad, and ugly, all the warts included, is far and away the greatest asset that we have. We have never turned it into the economic development juggernaut that it could be, but it still remains our greatest asset, and it's ours for the taking. It is ours organically. We have not had to hire the first consultant to come to Mississippi and tell us about our story. In fact, I have long held the view that the problem in Mississippi is that for my entire lifetime, and probably the lifetime of most of our state's history, which is now 200 years, I know y'all are a lot older, 300 I believe, we have allowed other people to tell our story, and we think they always get it wrong. We think the most powerful thing we can do is to tell our own story and get it right. But that's not easy, because our story is complicated. Our story involves slavery. Our story involves the Civil War. Our story involves the Civil Rights struggle. Our story involves a fair amount of poverty. Our story involves some difficult times. But we also have a great story around music. Because of the Mississippi Delta, I don't have to tell you this, you got the same thing. You have your own music culture. And in Mississippi, we put on our signs, birthplace of America's music, and I'm sure y'all are like, yeah, right. You have every right to say that. But it's just a slogan that means that the Delta was where the blues was born, and so it gave poor old Mississippi something we could hang our hat on. But the truth is, it came from Africa. It's not even from Mississippi. It's just where the slaves first presented it to the Americans. And so we still say that. And it has been helpful, because I'll tell you what happens when a community, a town, a city, or a state, or a country embraces their story. This is what happens. And I'm not talking about I decide what your story is, and I'm not talking about y'all get together and tell the rest of us what our story is. I'm talking about when we collectively agree on a story. You know, this is who we are, this is where we came from, this is our story. When that happens, one of the most powerful things happen. Economic development springs from that. Community development springs out of that. You can use it in education. There's nothing more powerful than telling a child that part of what they're learning is a part of their culture. That they understand that when you talk about the Chickasaw and the Choctaw and the Civil Rights struggle and the blues and William Faulkner and Richard Wright, when you read that in your textbook, I want you to understand that they came from the same place you came from. That is so powerful for a child. It sticks. And it's not just children, but adults as well. Adults are very proud that they came from the same place that B.B. King came from. They're very proud that they came from the same place that Eudora Welty came from. So it's economic development, community development, the power of education, the power of the arts in education. But to me, the most important thing that happens when a community or a town or a city or a state agrees on their story and starts telling it is that it builds civic pride. That is golden. When someone sticks their chest out and says, we just got this designation that we've been working on for 3 years for our town, and we won the award for the best Main Street, And we are the birthplace of America's music. And we are Cajun country. And we. When you can do that, it's very powerful and it's contagious. And it means a lot to places, particularly means a lot to places like Mississippi and Louisiana. So our journey, as I said, started with this partnership between the Arts Commission and what we now call Visit Mississippi, which is our tourism office, which is part of economic development. But when I was able to convince the governor and the director of economic development that the Arts Commission had something to say, that we represented this thing called the creative economy, that we represented this really important piece of our culture, that it was actually, it had numbers, they agreed. And so we became partners in this journey to develop Mississippi's creative economy. And so we did a study and we came out with these astounding numbers. And it was like 62,000 people in Mississippi work in the creative economy. It represented about 3.5% of our overall economy. And we used the same company that y'all used. And when we presented that, people were astounded. And this is what I said. These are remarkable numbers. They were actually higher than I thought they would be. And we did this in 2010. I said, not only do we have all of these creative workers working in our economy, architects, artists, musicians, filmmakers, you know who the creatives are. I don't have to tell you what creative workers are. Writers, poets, painters, potters, you know them. You know them, you love them. But when I said we have this many of them working in this economy and they have a huge economic impact, then they begin to take notice. And then I said to them, and guess what? They're already there organically. We, the state, we policymakers, we, the government, have had nothing to do with it. We didn't bring a thing to the potluck. It exists organically. We just went over there and discovered it. That's all we did. I said, what would happen if we incentivized it? What would happen if we encouraged it? What would happen if we nurtured it? What would happen if we said, we give a damn, and begin to give them, some sort of economic incentives the way we give Nissan and Toyota and all these big manufacturing companies that we are so excited about in Mississippi and are very important. I'm not saying they're not. But I said, what if we did the same thing for these small creative businesses? What if we gave them an incentive? What if we encouraged them to exist? What if we worked with the creative sector and tried to grow it? Then what would it look like? Well, we've never found out because I have yet to thoroughly convince anybody that this would be a good idea. We've given some small grants here and there to incentivize small companies, blue jean makers, beer makers, all the creative sector. But we have yet to make the full transition into treating the creative sector with the traditional economic development sector. And I understand it, because I deal with traditional economic developers every day, all day long. And they see the world in a different way than we do. They see the world through number of jobs, average salary, and economic return on investment, which I believe in return on investment too. But we've got a ways to go to really get, in my view, to where we can get equal treatment. So we're attending a summit about creative placemaking, and yesterday Gail Hamilton was with us, and she gave a magnificent presentation about what creative placemaking is. And this side of the room saw that, and this side of the room did not. But it was very thorough, and she literally listed all of the agencies and partners. And I would just say that if you're interested in the minutia of, in Louisiana, who do you connect to grow your creative placemaking, I would say that her PowerPoint would be far more direct. What I've been focused on, again, is Mississippi, and you guys have been focused on Louisiana, and I'm sure y'all have all of those resources available locally. But basically what it is how people tell their story. It's about places like this, and it's about NUNU, where we were yesterday, and it's about public art, and it's about a performance, and it's about festivals, and it's about all the things that you know it to be. And it's more and more, it's become kind of the buzzword. We kind of started in this business talking about creative economies and creative industries, and we have slowly made our way into placemaking, which is really a much cooler concept, because placemaking can be so many other things other than how we think of economies traditionally. It's kind of a sneaky way to talk about a new economic development, but we're just calling it creative placemaking. And it seems to be kind of the word that we're all using these days. So here's some examples of how we do this in Mississippi. I know everybody does markers, and there's nothing new under the sun. And I've walked outside and I've seen the markers in front of this building, and this lady just talked about more markers. So markers have become a real affordable way to tell our story. But I would say one of the most successful cultural undertakings that has occurred in my lifetime in my state of Mississippi are these trails. We have 200 plus of these blues markers in the ground in Mississippi. And they're not just markers. I mean, they're also connected to a wayfinding, to a downloadable. You can go to these markers with your smartphone and do a QR code, and that leads you to more information about the artist, more information about the trail, more information about other amenities in the area, like where to sleep, where to eat, where to go hear live music. I mean, there's great possibilities with markers besides just being a static information vessel. But in Mississippi, we started with these blues markers. And as I said, we've put 200 of them in the ground. We have about 12 outside of Mississippi in other American cities where Mississippians and blues people did very important things, like in Chicago. We have one in LA. We have them. We have there's one up in Maine where a blues festival exists. So we've used them not only internally to attract people to come to Mississippi to learn more about the blues, but we've also used them externally to take them out and to place them around in really interesting places so that people will see them and then think, wow, I've got to go to Mississippi to see this. We also have country music markers. We have 200 of these. We have 30 of these. We have one of these in Nashville. It's the only out of Mississippi marker we have. But we also have the Civil Rights Freedom Trail markers. And this is where you begin to tell your whole story. And this has been an incredibly impactful journey for us in Mississippi to place historical markers around a really difficult topic, the struggle for civil rights. But we've put them around. We've got about, there's 30 in the original phase, and we've got about, I think, 16 or 17 of them in the ground. And then our newest trail, which we just launched, just got our first grant from the National Humanities Endowment to do a literary trail. And so we're going to do a phase one of what we call Mississippi Writers Trail. And that'll be William Faulkner and Richard Wright and Eudora Welty and Richard Ford, and there are lots and lots of names. But to me, the most remarkable thing about the trail is this. Not only does it do what it was designed to do, which is to mark a place, to tell a story, but in almost every instance where we have marked a significant place, we have come back and built a cultural institution. In Indianola, Mississippi, which is a tiny little town up in the Delta, where B.B. King was raised, where his childhood was spent before he went away to make his name, we have built the B.B. King Museum. It's a $25 million state-of-the-art museum. What we've just done in Mississippi, which I think most people could never fathom, is that we have built a civil rights museum in Jackson, which is the only state-funded civil rights museum in the country. The state of Mississippi paid to tell the very difficult story of the civil rights struggle in our state. Probably now replaces what I said was the most important cultural significant opportunity in my lifetime. The opening of these two museums, a new history museum connected to a civil rights museum, $40 million, a beautiful state-of-the-art museums. And we likely, as well, the state has bought Eudora Welty's home, the writer, and it is now a part of a historical home that the public has access to, all of her papers, her home, her garden. And Marty Stewart, a country music guy, bluegrass guy, has his marker in little bitty Philadelphia, Mississippi. And there's also an enormous civil rights marker there for the 3 slain freedom riders in this area. But Marty has a marker, and Marty is the largest single collector of country music memorabilia, paraphernalia, and collectibles in the world. He's been collecting since he was 16 years old. He has costumes and guitars and lyrics and all kind of things. And he is building in his hometown what he calls Marty Stewart's New World of Country Music, the new Congress of Country Music in Philadelphia. So while we've put these markers around, and they're very successful in and of themselves, what is totally remarkable, and no one really saw coming, is that where we put markers and where trails go, we follow it up by building museums and cultural institutions. Mississippi has just opened a Grammy Museum. It's the only Grammy Museum outside of LA today. And the reason we built it in Cleveland, Mississippi is because of the blues and because Mississippi per capita has more Grammy winners than any other state. I'm sure Louisiana's in the top 3. I don't know. I won't argue with you about any of that. I'm just telling you how we do it. So we built, just in the most recent time, a B.B. King Museum, a Grammy Museum. We've begun the Marty Stewart New World Congress, and we've built the 2 museums for history and civil rights. So, to me, this is quietly the way culture, art, and story is sneaking up on economic development. Because in every community where we do this, their tax revenues begin to grow. Every time we open a new cultural institution that relates to our story, the tax revenues, the collections go up. There's a need for hotels, there's a need for restaurants, there's a need for coffee shops, there's a need for performing arts centers. And tourists start to come, call them tourists, visitors, people who come and who are curious about heritage and cultural tourism, which is really what we're developing in Mississippi. So more about creative placemaking, and that is that it is a method that uses arts and culture as a tool for community and economic development. You know that. We like to continue to talk about it because some people don't quite get that piece of the puzzle. So the reason I know how this works is that I actually did it myself while I was in the private sector before I got into the public sector. And another reason I was so attracted to the body of work known as creative economy, creative placemaking. Hal & Mal's is a restaurant, bar, and live music venue that I opened with my brother in 1985. It's in the old GM&O Freight Depot. And in that depot, it's 32,000 square feet of building. We realized we only needed a small part of it. So we began to sublet out to artists. We have a recording studio, we have several painters, we have post-production film studio there. And so over the years, we made cheap rent available to working artists and found that it began to build traffic in our restaurant and our bar and our live music venue. So inadvertently, and certainly without the language, because it didn't exist, we began to build a creative economy in downtown Jackson, a creative placemaking in downtown Jackson through this business. Now, I just published in March a book about this place, and this is a drawing from that book. And so we have not only taken an empty warehouse and put a dozen businesses in it, but we have now published a book about the story, which we call The Artful Evolution of Hal & Mal's, which takes it into yet another art form and gives it another whole life of its own. So when I talk about creative placemaking, I like to talk about intersections, a way to engage across sectors, and a way to work through intersections. And this often works, with main streets, with city government, county government, parish government, state government. We're always looking for intersections and interesting crossroads where this type of work can happen. And here are just a few examples from back home in Mississippi. This art garden was a parking lot 5 years ago. And it separated the Museum of Art from the city's art center. And then this is the Performing Arts Center in downtown Jackson, where the International Ballet Competition, the Olympics of dance, happens every 4 years. But this was a parking lot that separated these three creative buildings. And the idea was proposed that we would remove the parking lot and plant a garden there and make it a public space, a green space, where we could teach children and adults about landscaping. There's a stage, there's public art. And you would have thought we were proposing a new tax. Everybody opposed it because they said it would take away the parking for the ballet classes, and it would take away from parking where the symphony was used to parking, and it would take away parking from patrons coming to hear a concert. It was the wildest thing. But we kept saying, but no, we're going to create this amazing new space that totally relates to what we all do. But it was unbelievable, the fight that ensued, but ultimately we got this beautiful placemaking project completed. And now these are the proudest people you've ever heard. To hear them tell it was their idea, which is the way it works when you get everybody in the same room and you work toward a common goal. This is the great blues man Robert Johnson's hometown, and where the crosswalks on the roads are, they put down musical notes, and they're literally the scores of his music. So as you walk across the street in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, which is actually where Robert Johnson was born, which is ironic because Robert Johnson is known as the king of the Delta blues, and he was born in Hazelhurst, which is in southwest Mississippi, nowhere near the Delta. But he died in the Delta, and he spent a lot of time up there, so things like that happen. But there's a little museum dedicated to Robert Johnson there, and this is in Crystal Springs, which is the next little town. over, which is where his grandson lives. So they've done this beautiful placemaking. This is Tupelo, home of Elvis Presley. Maybe you've heard of him, I don't know. They did a guitar trail. So you can go on a tour, a self-guided tour of Elvis's life by following these guitars around town. So it's a sort of a creative way to do the traditional marker for the community. So these are just 3 examples that I share, and I know you have hundreds of your own, but these have all been very successful and have really helped us build our placemaking around the state. So as I said, when creative placemaking is incorporated, the result is everything from economic development, traditional and non-traditional, because people want to live in creative places. One of the things about the great study and the work that has been done around the creative economy and placemaking is that we have discovered that in the 21st century, many creative workers can live anywhere they want to live because of the technology. And so where they've chosen to live are in creative places. And I've only been here one day, but I've met a dozen people who came to this part of the world to do, I don't know what the work study program is called here. It's work for some.
Workaway and HelpX.
All of those.
And yeah, the Logique internships.
Right.
Yeah.
But here, in Mississippi, mostly where we get young people is through Teach for America, because our schools are so terrible up in the Mississippi Delta that these Teach for America kids come there and they make a 2-year commitment to teach in our public schools. And guess what happens after 2 years? They meet a boy, they meet a girl, they fall in love with the culture, they stay. Mm-hmm. And that's the young people that I've met here, it's the same deal. They get here, they drink the Kool-Aid, they love the land of sugar cane and hot sauce, and they never want to leave. And so, you know, it builds economic development, community ownership, it impacts public health, certainly public art. This idea of gaining and retaining young people is just so big. This idea that you could create a place where young people choose to live is another whole level. But it happens when creative placemaking works. Public safety, increased access, and as I always say, you know, the golden one is the building of the civic pride, which, when that happens, it's just remarkable. So it can help you to identify and develop your community's unique assets, which it sounds almost silly now, thinking back that 5-10 years ago, we didn't even really acknowledge our assets. We didn't really think much of it. In Mississippi, we had given the blues away to New Orleans and to Memphis and just said, you can have it, we don't want it. White people think it's trash, and black people want to move on from it. Tired of the blues. It reminds them of a very tough time, and they've about had all of the blues they want. They're ready to get into some pinks and some greens.
Yeah.
And but what we discovered was when we incorporated it as an economic development tool and began to put up markers and build museums, everybody got on board and said, yeah, that's my music. You know, that's my people's music. We're very proud of that. And we literally took something that we saw as a giveaway in Mississippi and turned it into this thing that's now on our sign. It says, welcome to Mississippi, the birthplace of America's music. That would have never happened 20 years ago. You know, we would never bring in economic developers to the state of Mississippi and take them up to a juke joint in the Delta. What we used to do was drive them around the Delta so they wouldn't see it and try to get them to open a factory in northeast Mississippi or northwest Mississippi or in Jackson. We would never even acknowledge that the Delta existed because it was so poor. But now it's a must-do. We fly these people in to tout opening up a business in Mississippi we take them straight to a juke joint in the Mississippi Delta. Unheard of 10 years ago. But we've gone complete full circle on our story and our agreeing upon it and telling it as an economic development and community development tool. And I don't have to tell anybody in Arnaudville or New Iberia about that, because y'all are doing it, you get it. It's a very powerful and successful tool. This is a slide you may not be able to see, but it talks about what makes a great place and who cares. Everybody cares about living in a great place and having a job in a great place and going to college in a great place. Great places are what attract young, innovative, creative workers. And it has this whole wheel of sociability, use and activities, comfort and image, access, linkages. And it's everything from, driving down crime rates to, driving up local entrepreneurship and everything in between. And it's all in that tiny little file there that's probably too small to read. So the Arts Commission, partnering with economic development, launched this big idea about the creative economy. And meanwhile, our traditional economic shop, the Mississippi Development Authority, was doing what they called asset mapping. Now, how many of y'all know about asset mapping? Okay, it's where you get a bunch of people in a car, you go to a town, and you show them what their assets are. You say, well, you have great schools here, and your sewer, oh, you have a tremendous sewer system. It works really great. And over here, you say, oh, you got great traffic, and you have public buildings, and it's very traditional assets, what they call asset mapping. So what we have decided to do now, after all these years of promoting the creative economy and placemaking having evolved as the new language, we've created place mapping. So what we do at the Arts Commission is we get a bunch of people in a car and we come to your town and we tell you where the great places are and where the creative assets are. And we don't worry about sewer and water and power and schools. We don't get into all that. So we go around and we help small communities, mostly rural, underserved communities, find their jewels, their cemeteries, crossroads, places to put markers, places to celebrate, how to start a little festival in your town, how to celebrate a local character or citizen. So that is what we have sort of decided is our way now to service our constituency in the arts world. So it results in this participatory, representative, place-based improvements that more truly reflect the needs of the people, providing increased access to the arts, local engagement, civic pride, and highlighting what makes a place unique. And this is kind of, as I said, this is our new initiative and our new partnership. So, as I prepare to leave you, I think the conversation could become about how you use placemaking to tell your community's story. And I think in many, many ways, you're certainly already doing that. But I think it warrants a larger discussion, particularly when you talk about issues of diversity and issues of struggle and hard topics. Like the other day we had a nice roundtable conversation in Arnaudville about race and slavery and how we have come to terms with it in the 21st century, and what's everybody's perspective on race issues, gender issues, fill in the blank. So sometimes these are easy conversations. They're about agreed upon topics, which are as obvious as the nose on your face, and sometimes they're very difficult topics, like the way that Mississippi has dealt with both the Civil War and the Civil Rights struggle. And those are two very different conversations that we have to have. There are people, as you know, who are very endeared to the Civil War and to their ancestors who fought our great American Civil War. And we have to be careful in the way that we discuss that, not to leave anybody out of the discussion. We have the Daughters of the Confederacy, we have Confederate monuments, and you all know what the struggle looks like to remove a monument. Talk about a difficult conversation. And then when you want to talk about the civil rights struggle, you have to talk about some extraordinarily difficult topics like lynching and murder and maiming and shaming and discriminating. This is hard stuff. But what I think happens here is that we in the arts and culture sector have opened up a can of conversation about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I promise you that in Mississippi, it has been very healing for us to talk about all of it and to be truthful about it. And I travel a lot, and when I go places and people say, "Where are you from?" and I say Mississippi, there is an immediate, stranger in the room. They have a million questions. I call it the curiosity factor, and it's not all good. But James Meredith, the man who integrated the University of Mississippi, says that Mississippi is the most powerful word in the English language, because he says that no one can say it without the other person conjuring up some sort of response. Now, this is one of those places where you don't want to be equal to us. You don't want to say Louisiana and then people go, "Oh." But when you say Mississippi, people go, "Oh, Mississippi." Now, if they are ethnomusicologists, they think you are the birthplace of everything that their life revolves around. If they are students of American literature, they want to go home with you. They want to know all about Faulkner and Welty and Wright and Jessamine Ward. They want to know all about this literary stuff. If they're students of antebellum architecture, they want to know about Columbus, and they want to know about Holly Springs, and they want to know about Natchez, and they want to know about Vicksburg, and they just think that you are the cat's meow. But if they know a little bit about American history, and not a lot, when you say Mississippi, they conjure up the very worst. The movie Mississippi Burning comes immediately to their mind. As it should, because all of that happened. But the way that we treat it is, it's the golden opportunity to begin a conversation and to take it head on and to be honest and to tell it all and to be honest about that. So when you take on this idea of telling your story, one must recall and remember that it's not all glorious, that there are some very difficult pieces in our past that we must all tread alongside when we get into this storytelling business. Okay, I have no idea what time it is or how long I've been talking or what is supposed to happen next, but I do know that at the end of this, we were going to have a Q&A, and we can, I'm not in charge here, but we can take a break and then have a Q&A. I know lunch is coming shortly. I have always recognized that a place that one never wants to be is between a person's lunch and a presentation. So we can merge into Q&A or take a break in Q&A, whatever the powers. Jackie, what do you want to do?
I think we should allow some time for some questions, and I'm going to go grab George and let him assist you with this really quickly.
Okay, so any questions, observations? Yes, ma'am.
How does Mississippi fund infrastructure that you use to tell your story. You mentioned these fabulous museums. So how do you fund that?
Well, in the case of, they're all different, but basically, our state has appropriated millions and millions of dollars to seed fund the building of these museums. They will give, like if it's a $25 million project, the legislature will appropriate generally in the $5,000 to $7,000 to $10,000 range, and then it's up to the community to raise the remainder of their money. Sometimes they'll do that over a series of years so that there's planning. We've learned the hard way how to do it. And the best way is not to give $10 million to a big idea. The best way is to offer it in phases: planning phase, development phase, construction phase.
The two museums you mentioned that are together, those are state-owned?
They're state supported.
States.
They are operated by the state of Mississippi through the Department of Archives and History. The same as Eudora Welty's house. Historic homes, history museums, and in this case, the Civil Rights Museum are all operated by and were funded, not in totality, but to a great measure by the state of Mississippi. I forget the number, but the state put in somewhere around $10 or $20 million for the two museums.
Kudos for Mississippi.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yes.
But here's where the hard part comes in.
Yeah.
The state doesn't do operating. So we get these things open, and then we have to worry about sustainability.
Yeah.
And that's where the Arts Commission comes in. If it's an arts-based institution, I'm the only grantee or the grantor of operating funds. So it's a difficult, we have a difficult future ahead if we don't design a way for each of these places to have an endowment. I have advocated for part of the money should be an endowment, the other part should be to build, so that when you build, you already have money in the bank. Because if you don't, your staff will do nothing but raise money 24/7, and it will wear them out, and they'll never get around to programming and promotion and the really important parts of a cultural institution's survival. Yes?
Hi, I'm Ann Marcus, and I'm one of the co-authors of Creative Placemaking. And I want to ask you a couple of really tough questions or make points. One, if you read our Creative Placemaking study and look at what Art Place and NEA are doing now, economic development is not the main outcome point. It's really about the intrinsic values of the arts and celebrating in all kinds of ways and getting together. And I could say a lot more about that. I've written about.
Can I answer that one first?
No, can I propose the other one?
Okay.
The other one I think is more important, and it's about the challenge to our work that came from Roberto Bedoya and other people about placekeeping. And it's about the problem that creative placemaking has been essentially an excuse for displacement and gentrification in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. And I love Roberto's formulation. We're writing a paper together about it because his whole idea is that arts and culture should be in and of the community, and that it should be placekeeping. And we've really thought a lot about how programs for creative places can be structured. And I want to say that I spent some time in Clarksdale a few years ago and had a wonderful time, and also a wonderful conference that was at the University in Cleveland. And I found that the African American and young Black and white people in Clarksdale, which is, by the way, a town in which there are only two schools. There's a public school that's all black and a private school that's all white, including really poor white kids, which was shocking to me, as somebody, from Minnesota, although we have our Native American and African American issues also. So what I discovered was that there was tremendous gentrification going on in Clarksdale. There was outside money, some of from Hollywood, even from black actors, but a lot of white gentrification going on in Clarksdale, where the National Blues Museum is, and that when we went to a blues event, it was all white musicians, and the young people in town, white and black, were really distressed about the fact that what they felt was their own culture and what they were really that there wasn't really a place, a name, or resources for them to do what they wanted to do, and how to really stop the displacement of a lot of poor people who were just being run out of downtown. So those are the challenging questions for you.
I've already forgotten the first one. Because the second one
It's
took
about
so long.
economic development, but the second one I think is more important.
Yeah, well, I never said economic development was the most important outcome. I said it was one of the outcomes, and it has been one of the best partnerships that we've had. If we had not engaged the traditional economic developers in this conversation, we would have never have been able to do the work. So we tried to find something for everybody in this equation. But I never said it was the most important. I just said it was one of the things that it impacts. Civic pride is the most important. And I think what you're saying is that you think civic pride's being left out of the equation.
No, actually, I'll just listen. What are the arts about? Creating beauty, inspiring, entertaining, nurturing and passing on our traditional cultures, providing political and social critique, communicating our rich differences to each other, making us think in new ways. Those are the intrinsic values, not the instrumental values of arts and culture.
Okay, so the second part was about your critique of Clarksdale, which we consider one of our greatest recoveries. It was a community that had died, and its downtown was vacant. It had it had a museum and a library. It had really no retail downtown remaining. And these people, including Morgan Freeman, who you named without naming, invested millions and millions and millions of dollars to revitalize their community. That's where Morgan is from. He may have made a reputation in Hollywood, but he's from the Clarksdale area. So, you know, there are a lot of outside money, and there's a lot of outside money, and a lot of outside businesses that come there. But most people I talk to are happy to have them because there were no jobs. There were very few, there was very little light on in Clarksdale. I don't know if you ever went there before you were invited to speak at a conference, because there were no conferences and there were no speakers because there was no economy. It was the end of the long tail of an agrarian economy where mechanization had created no jobs for the workers. There were a handful of wealthy people who owned all the land, and other than that, there was very little going on until the small businesses began to crop up. Everything from canoe trips on the river to coffee shops, and the museum was one of the strongholds, the Mississippi Delta Museum, the Delta Blues Museum. But anyway, I think what you're saying is important, but you know, for us, that renaissance, that recovery was essential to revitalize a really desperate area of our state. And it has grown, it has many tentacles throughout the Delta now of others who have sort of followed those examples. In terms of the school systems, I'm not in education. There is a lot of self-imposed separate schools still remaining in the United States of America. It's unfortunate. You know, I, as the director of the Arts Commission, hate to see that. The federal government just forced a school system in Cleveland, Mississippi, where we built the Grammy Museum, to reintegrate because they had self-segregated. It was just crazy. But there are many challenges. We have not yet arrived. And I think you pointed out some of the problem areas that still exist in a place like Mississippi. Yes?
Do you have any plans to update your study?
We took a shot at updating it in 2014, found basically the same numbers, really couldn't afford. You know, that first study cost $130,000, whatever. It was a massive amount of money.
Yeah.
We couldn't, but we did engage the consultants to give us sort of an update on the numbers, but nothing had really changed. And so my proposition or my question about what happens if you incentivize it, does it grow? well, first of all, we had not incentivized it.
Right.
And it did not grow. It has remained almost at the same organic level that we found it in. Though there are success stories, there are also places that remain exactly the same. So that was our attempt at revisiting it. Yes, sir.
To piggyback off of her question, has the state come up with any initiatives to maybe kind of explain things in a deeper way like you just did? I mean, because I think that partially, that's part of the issue is we only see it from maybe outsiders coming in perspective. So, you know, in order to, like you mentioned, tell your own story, is there anything available to people to find out why things are, you know, that way and what changes are being made to combat those issues?
You mean like a PR campaign?
It could be, you know,
well,
maybe.
I would say not other than the opening of the museums, the creating of the trails. I think we're just at the beginning of trying to, you know, reshape the narrative. Because the narrative is horrible. You know, there is no explaining a certain amount of your past. But through recognizing the civil rights struggle and presenting it as an important part of our history by building a civil rights museum is a first step toward reckoning with your past. And it's very difficult to do. And I'll tell you that our government, because government doesn't do a lot of things well. And it really struggles in this arena. And, you know, sometimes, you know, they'll put a little money towards something and then it takes soldiers to really take it to the next level. But I don't think there's been a concerted, large-scale effort by the state government to reshape the narrative, other than through these examples that I've given where there's often a public-private partnership and there are people like me who work in government who are out there trying to push for change. That may or may not answer your question. But I would not say that the state of Mississippi's government has done all that well in reshaping the narrative.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you start recognition of telling your story, do you use arts and culture as your focal point to be able to tell the story with, or is it the story itself and then whatever happens or becomes part of it becomes the focal point?
Well, for the Arts Commission, we start with arts and culture.
Arts and culture.
But if it comes from the Economic Development Authority in Coahoma County, where Clarksdale is, and they have an idea, then we get brought in as a partner, and our job is to try to move it toward arts and culture, though to them it may just be about heads and beds, jobs, return on investment. So we have all sorts of partners. Universities have a mission, but we try to partner with them to shape the arts and culture piece.
Okay, so
we work with the highway department. They have initiatives. We try to bring it to arts and culture.
So you said during the presentation about economic development having a very hard time understanding the arts and culture part. And I think part of it is that our economic development wants to see statistics. They want to see those sales tax revenues that go up in a community as a product of this new museum or whatever it is, the Arts Trail, and bringing people in. And so how are y'all, have you been successful? I guess you've been more successful than us because the state is funding a commission. So how did you get arts and culture to the table of economic development?
Well, I think we accidentally occurred there in 1968 when we opened the Arts Commission. No one thought about what it was going to be. We were just getting the federal money and matching it with state, and we went about our business and no one even noticed us. But now we're trying to partner with other people and to achieve greater goals. We find ourselves in partnerships with all sorts of people. But we have seen a marketed increase in appetite, in interest, and enthusiasm. But you're absolutely right that often what I have to say in public to you know, to get the interest of an economic developer might be that it's going to create jobs and ROI and sales tax. But what I'm really thinking is, I don't really care about that. What I care about is the story itself. I care about the art and culture. But my job is to, you know, represent both, and they're very different worlds, and I know that. And oftentimes the reason I can actually go to the meeting is because they say, well, that guy, he owns his own business and he's successful, even though he is in the arts.
Yeah.
So it gives me kind of a unique opportunity to represent. You know, whether you agree with, you know, the work that we're doing or not, it's a constant struggle to get financial partners. And sometimes when the governor gets on board, it helps. Sometimes when the legislature gets on board, it helps. Sometimes when the Main Street sees the world the way you do, it's very helpful. And then sometimes it's very hard. Is that close to answering the question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just something about Louisiana.
It is
Yes,
something about Louisiana.
Well, I think the trail markers and the museums are all, like you said, they're starting places. And that doesn't mean that the work is done. It really means the work has just begun. But to the point about economic development, we have a separate economic development organization in our community, but I'm here from the Chamber of Commerce. And a few years ago, our board really centered on the fact that quality of life in the community was key to economic development and to the prosperity in the community. So, you know, and we are slow, but we are moving in the direction of having a much broader view than I think people generally think of chambers of commerce as having. Mm-hmm. And one outcome of all this discussion is having heard Phoebe Hayes talk last Monday about some of the work she's doing, and I really believe that the chamber can partner with her to help begin to retell the history of Iberia Parish in a more accurate way, and I'm looking forward to that.
Great. I mean, that's a great way.
And because of the civic pride and all of the things that come out of that.
Yeah. Livability and quality of life are huge buzzwords when I talk to traditional chambers and economic development people, because whether it's the most important one or just one of the possible outcomes, it is a part of the success when in my opinion, you tell your story and you tell it honestly and you involve everybody. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in 2 years or 5 years, particularly in a place like Mississippi that has a long journey ahead when talking about race and slavery and civil rights. I mean, good Lord, that's a tough conversation for a lot of people back home to talk about. But slowly but surely, and this museum was a huge step for the state to come to terms with this. You know, slowly but surely we're, I think, making a more honest narrative out of what used to be a farce. It's a joke, the way we told our history and our story. You know, the books that our children studied in school are lies. It's incorrect information, and boy, that's been tough to try to go in and slowly get it right after you've been getting it wrong for so long. But that's the part that we own. You know, that we have a lot of cleanup to do. But we have found that these instruments and these tools have helped us in cleaning up. That the arts and culture has been a great lens in which to get people to see the way forward. We weren't going forward for the longest. We weren't going forward. We were just separated in our camps and in our schools, and we weren't going anywhere. Now, because this is my life's work, I believe it's powerful, you know, whether it's placekeeping or placemaking. I think they're both very important. And gentrification, you know, that's a tough one. Some people would love to have some of it, just because it's economic development, and some people fear it. I've seen it destroy places, I've seen it make places. It's hard. I don't have the clue, I'm not in charge of all of that. But anyway, it's a great question. And this is a great conversation, and I know we got to eat, so I believe in nourishment. But I'll talk, I'll be around if you want to visit about this, good, bad, or ugly.
And we can eat and talk too.
We could eat and talk.
Can I ask a really quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the markers, and in our community, because it's a wonderful community, it really is. We have a lot of work to do. We have good people coming together to do that work. In our community, the markers are especially important to me because they're indicators of the people I come from and their contributions to Iberia Parish, which are many, but they're hidden. They're hidden at this point. We're unfolding all of that. But for example, we have at this point one state marker developed or devoted to a woman of African ancestry descent, Felicity. And we don't have anyone else that the markers, celebrate their achievements. Now we're beginning to change some things. But I think it's very important that the history of blacks, especially in the Deep South, is celebrated and it's presented to the community as history and not just stories. So I totally agree and I appreciate your presentation. I'm hearing you say things that are just core values to me and just things that kind of motivate me to do the things that I do. Our stories need to be told and told by us, And the stories have to be, the truth can be very difficult and very painful, especially when you talk about not just slavery, but Reconstruction and Jim Crow era violence and the obliteration of the history of the Africans in this area. So to me, it's very important to restore that history with facts, with evidence that's there, And so I'm just saying that I really appreciate your presentation because sometimes I want to sing and I'm so sorry because I keep talking. As you're talking, it's almost like church, amen, what you're saying. But I really appreciate the things that you're saying because it tells me that we're on the right track with some of the initiatives that we're trying to do.
But I think we chose wisely to do music first because it is so inclusive. In fact, it's mostly African American in our state. And so by the time we got to the freedom trails, to the civil rights trails, everybody had already become very accustomed to telling both sides of the story because we'd already been down the one trail. But anyway, it's a journey, and it is not easy. Being inclusive is difficult in places where I came from, and we still have lots of work to do. This thing about the schools, it's unbelievable. The state of the public schools in my state are deplorable and inexcusable, and I can't believe, because we have a school initiative where we use arts integration as a methodology because in Mississippi they took PE and art out of the schools 20 years ago because of budget savings. And it devastated fun and joy in the classroom because they took out art and physical education and recess and going outside all in one. It wasn't overnight, but they began to say no more PE coaches, no more music teachers, no more visual arts teachers. So we have this program called Whole Schools Initiative where we teach public school teachers how to use the arts as a teaching tool. We teach a person who can't sing a note how to use music to teach history, math, and science. And because of this initiative, which we've had for 25 years in Mississippi, and Louisiana has a relatively new arts integrated model. I think it's called ABCD or ABC or A+, or something. A+. Same kind of deal. But because of that, we're in the schools a lot. And it's disheartening and disturbing that in the 21st century, we still have separate but unequal schools, and it's public-private. That's what happened in Mississippi. these private schools. Now, some communities didn't go there. Tupelo, the Northeast Hills, did not really go there. The coast did not go there. But the Mississippi Delta, Jackson, and places like that, immediately upon integration, started setting up academies, private schools, and the whites began to flee, and they were out of there within a handful of years. And then you can go into these schools and see that the funding is not equitable. The resources are not equitable. The kids are not getting the same quality of education. And our legislature fights every year from the beginning of the gavel to sine die over public school funding. And they fight and they fight and they fight. And at the end of the day, they always come up millions short of what we call adequate in Mississippi, which is not. But anyway, I could talk about that stuff, but other than our education initiatives, we don't have much to say about the school system in Mississippi except how bad it is. And it is. In some areas, better than others, but still sad. Has nothing to do with arts and culture, really, but it does in many ways. All right.
All right, anybody else? Ready to eat?
Thank you.